Welcome back, ladies and gents, and thank you so much for watching another wonderful day out here in the fall on the property. Did a video a little bit ago where we talked about both quartering and also aging deer meat. As promised, we're going to follow up now with some processing. No, I'm not going to do it out here, although it would be nice to be out here doing it. I'm going to be at the house, and it's kind of a rudimentary setup. The camera angles is not as good as I wanted it to be, but I really hope it helps someone. Just like everything else we do out here, it's basic. Basic knives, basic tools, basic everything. The key really is to have good venison when it's done, and that's what we get, and that's exactly what we're going for. Just like everything else, I'm not an expert. So if you're a butcher or you're a processor, just close your eyes and pretend like you didn't see any bad habits that I have. But I hope it helps someone, and it just kind of shows that anybody can do this. But anyway, let's get right to it and see if we can't get it done. All right, folks, so we're just going to jump right into this because we are dealing with raw meat and we want to get this done. So if you watch my other videos, we had one about showing quartering and aging the meat. Now, in the quartering, I didn't really show it because of all the blood in YouTube. I'm assuming this isn't a problem since you can literally buy raw meat in the store, but I don't know. Who knows what the rules may be, but as the channel implies, we don't look at rules. So I will say this like I did last time. I am not a processor. I'm not a butcher. I don't have any experience doing it. My experience is simply watching some YouTube videos and just rolling up my sleeves and getting into it. We started doing this on our own simply because when we got into hunting again, when we got our property and we wanted to start taking animals on our own for our own benefit, we couldn't find a processor that we knew much about. And I had heard a lot of horror stories. So we're like, why not do it ourselves? So here we are. So what we're going to do, this is the front shoulder of the deer. I actually did one of the shoulders last night. And we're going to go through one front shoulder, one hind quarter, and one back strap. Now we also pull neck meat off, rib meat off, and the tenderloins. The neck meat and the rib meat, we just throw that in the grind pile, which I'll show you guys here in a bit what that even means if you're not sure what that means. And with the tenderloins, you can just throw them on the grill, however you want to cook them and so forth. And we are going to get into some cooking stuff later. Now, again, I am not an expert. So if you are, please feel free to make comments and flame away if you want. But I will say this, our venison always tastes phenomenal every year. And we've been doing this about 5 to 6 years. So it turns out good. Where I lack is technique. So or efficiency, if you want to call it that. So what we do on the front shoulders, we're going to grind every bit of this. Most people do grind the shoulders. I know there's a lot of other folks out there, like even this shank meat down here, that will have certain recipes. Look them up, man. There's all kinds of cool stuff online and ideas. We have a lot of mouths to feed in this household, so for us, it makes sense to get the ground so we can have quantity and quality, if you want to look at it that way. And when we get into the hind quarter, we'll show you some ideas for roast as well as steak. So all we're going to do on this meat is we just want to get as much junk off as possible. So we'll take that, and we want to get all this tissue, membrane, fat, and so forth as much as we can. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cut it off and just throw it in a container that's just junk, just that. Stuff you could throw it down the garbage disposal, you could throw it in the woods, you could feed it to your neighbor's dog, although that's probably not a good idea. So your neighbor probably wouldn't be too happy. But what we're trying to do is we're just trying to separate some of this tissue and everything from the meat. Now, I'm not going to film this entire thing or I'm going to run out of camera space and you folks are going to die of sheer boredom. So what we'll do is we'll halt it here in a second and kind of show where we're pulling some pieces off. And then we're just going to take the chunks, throw them on the plate, and run them through the grinder. And the grinder, to me, is the cool part. It's nice and easy. Anybody can do it. And yes, you can easily buy them on Amazon or whatever. Also, these knives, the knife set that I've got here is nothing but, it's really hard for me to talk and do this at the same time. This was a kit that I bought off Amazon. The same knife set I used to quarter the deer, and it even has a saw for the deer for bones, etc. Although there are ways to remove these quarters without cutting anything. That includes these joints down here. I just have not gotten that good yet, so hopefully I will at some point. So for these front shoulders, all I'm going to do is just get all this meat off using your knife. And I'm going to try to separate the meat from as much tissue as possible. Now, one question before I get into it for you experts out there. One area that I struggle with personally is how much tissue, tendons, fat, etc., do you take off of the meat before you grind it? Or do you just leave all this on? I'd like to know, because I've gotten a little more aggressive over the years where I leave more on because it makes it just quicker and it still tastes good. I'm not really sure what the right thing to do is with that. Okay. So if you know that, throw it in the comments. It'll help all of us, because that is where you can see pulling this off. That to me is where the timing is. Not cutting up steaks, not cutting up back straps or anything like that. It's just trying to get all the not so palatable parts that hold it off the animal. And you can see as I start to remove this tissue, you have meat down underneath it. And all I'll do is start separating it. And you can literally, like in through here, you can see it. When you get this tissue off, see if I can show an example here. I'll probably cut into that meat a little too much. When you start getting in here, you can see where these muscles, see that? They'll start to separate. You can actually pull them almost off the bone when you start to get the tissue. That'll really help you to cut them out of there. You pull the pieces off, throw them in the grinder. It's really that simple. So I'm going to kind of get into this a little bit, and then I'll catch up with you guys here in a moment as we have a little more stuff completed. All right, a little stopping point here just to kind of explain a few things on the way. So you can see here, we're already starting to get some nice ground chunks here that we're going to be running through the grinder, and all I'm doing is just cutting up the pieces I take off after you remove any of the junk or trash that you don't want on it. Throw them in there. Again, if anybody has suggestions on how much of that to leave, please throw it in there. That's the part I spend the most time on. But to me, you can't go wrong with making it as clean as possible. One other thing to keep in mind, here's something I pulled out, is this deer was shot behind the shoulder. It was actually shot on this side. So it was shot about right in this area, or maybe a little lower. When you rifle shot these things, even if it's behind the shoulder, you have a really good chance of getting pieces of the round or the bullet into the meat. So for example, I don't know if you can see it here. See if you can see it here. There it is. Piece of lead right there that I pulled out of it. So be careful when you go through there. So like this right here was shot up pretty good. So I'm going to have to be very careful. Just cut around it. Cut the junk out. If you see any bloody areas where it looks like there's dirt or stuff, just use common sense and cut around it and you'll be fine. But when we get to the hindquarters, those are awesome. That's where all the meat is, and that's where I feel the magic happens. But again, you can see this one, it was already broken whenever I got him, and I'm just going to have to go through all that. I'm going to get back at this because time is of the essence, and I do not want any of this to go bad. For this shoulder, we're now down to what's called the shank meat. This is, if you want to think of anatomy, think of your ankle or something like that. I know that's kind of weird. Now, on this stuff, I've read where some people actually throw this out. I don't know why you would do that. It's still meat. I used to literally go through this stuff and try to pick every little thing out. Here recently, I've actually been processing it as is, and it's been perfectly good, perfectly fine, tastes phenomenal. And then all I'm going to do, I'll try to cut as much stuff off of it as I can. I'm just going to cut it into chunks or strips. Yeah, my knife needs to be sharpened. Actually, I need to get a new set of knives. I have used these things quite a bit. For as cheap as they were, I think I got my money's worth out of them. So normally I would clean a lot of this off. I have been throwing it in the pile. So this is why I've been wondering, and I left I said, make a comment if you know how much you should and shouldn't leave, because I do think that sometimes I personally spend too much time on stuff. So just something to think about. But we're about to put this in the grinder. You guys will see. That's where the grinder is actually very satisfying, because you can see your chunks of meat turning into actual ground venison, and it's great. Another thing, this quarter was very shot up more than I thought. I mentioned earlier that I'm mostly a rifle hunter. My rifle shots are behind the shoulder. And the reason is because, I don't even know if I need to cut all these up like this. It's just something to do while I'm talking. But the reason is because I don't want to have the whole shoulder completely destroyed. Some hunters take shots on the shoulder or high shoulder because it will drop the deer usually in its tracks. But that's not always the case, because I have shot one in the shoulder and it actually was still moving. So not always the case, but that's why I do it. But the ammo is just doing its job. I love the ammunition I use and the setup. I actually run a setup that most people do not deer hunt. I'm not the traditional type of bolt rifle hunter. So if you're curious what I use, make some comments. Also, I'm probably going to do a video on it. And I'm sure that'll be a controversial video, but that's, hey, that's what the internet's for, right? People share their different ideas and you can either agree or disagree. But we didn't get as much meat off of this as I had hoped, simply because there was quite a bit of pieces of lead. And I personally do not want the risk of myself or somebody in my family eating that lead. And I don't think anybody else would want to. So now we're going to go get this cleaned up a little bit. We're going to go get the grinder and we're going to run this stuff through that and show you guys how it looks. And it is awesome. From there, all we're going to do is bag it up, throw it in the freezer, good to go. So now we're going to get this stuff ground up. This is actually the easy and almost, dare I say, satisfyingly fun part. So call me weird, but I think it's pretty cool. So the grinder. So this is a pretty basic grinder. Got this on Amazon. It is a stainless grinder. You can see it just mounts to this. And guys, we're also, I didn't call this out earlier, we're just doing this in the garage, or in the, in the basement. Okay, we just got a basic countertop, nothing fancy, nothing like that, just a space we could find. And we just hooked this to the side of this counter. You could do this on any counter. I'm sure you could do it on a granite counter, whatever. Obviously, be careful if you're worried about the finish. But about these grinders, so when I first got these, when I first got started doing this, I bought a cheap aluminum grinder from like Academy. It was like 35 bucks and it worked. The problem was, it was a couple things. Number one, it was sluggish, meaning it would get bogged down and I would have to take this all apart and clean it all the time in the middle of grinding. And it wasn't bad, but it got kind of annoying. But then I started noticing in here where this spins, right in here, I was actually, even though the bushing was in there, I was actually starting to get pieces of aluminum getting ground up and getting in the meat. So we ended up having to throw out almost like a quarter of a grind pile, if that makes sense, like a quarter of a quarter. And that wasn't very cool. So got this stainless one and I started reading. I actually saw where people said, I don't even know why they make grinders in aluminum, because they're not sanitary. And aluminum is very porous. So lesson learned on my part. This one was a little over $100. You can see the brand name on the side. I will put a link in the, or not a link, but just a description in the comment. These are made in Japan and they seem to be very good. And these things go through, because they're stainless, the meat literally goes through it very quickly, and cleaning it is super easy. So all we're going to do is take our chunks and just start turning. And they make electric ones and all that, but if you're just doing this for your home, like me, you don't need anything fancy. But this is probably the most expensive piece of equipment that we have bought for doing this. And I'm not going to film the entire grinding. But what I'll do is, whenever we do a quarter, each time, quarter of the deer, we will have a pile to grind. If it's a shoulder, it's going to all be ground. And this will be done each time. And so we will have ground as well from the hind quarter. As you can see that coming out, how great that looks. Another thing, if you notice, I am not adding any fat to this, nothing. Now, I'll just explain this while I'm doing this. When I started doing this, I read about deer fat, and I've read a lot of places that say don't use deer fat, it's bad, it's nasty, it doesn't taste good. It's not going to hurt you, it just doesn't taste good. But then I've read some other areas where they say you can use it. I don't know the truth on it, but I do know that I try to cut all the fat off that I can, just to keep it as lean as possible. So what a lot of people do, see, look at that. Doesn't that look great? Man, it looks good. So what a lot of people will do whenever they grind is they'll go to the store or a butcher and they'll buy some beef fat. And I guess you could do pork as well, maybe. I don't like doing that. We don't, because to us it kind of defeats the purpose of having a lean deer, a lean natural deer versus some, then adding fat from the store. Now, where the fat helps is it helps with like burgers, holding that ground together when you're grilling it. We have a way to do that that makes deer taste excellent. So we will share that with you guys whenever we make some burgers out of this stuff. And we will pass it on to you because it's some cool tips. Plus, just Google. Go to Google. You can find all kinds of recipes for doing that. You can see that coming out. And there are some stuff in there because you're not going to get every speck of fat and tissue and so forth. And when we're done, we will weigh it because we know how much we need per serving for our family. And we'll bag it up based on that serving. and you're just ready to go. Just grab it out of the freezer. And this stuff will be frozen today. We might actually use some today. Don't know. But you can see this is going. And that old grinder I was talking about, there's no way I could have went this fast. It was awful. So if you're going to get a grinder, I would recommend spending a little bit more, personally. Just the cleanliness alone is great. So we're going to cut this right here. We will be right back with you guys as soon as we are done, and we'll show you the finished product. And here is a plateful. So we got through all that ground. Here is a close-up too. If you want to see the name, maybe this other side will do better. Let me get over here. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if that helps anybody, but again, I'll try to find it online and put it in the description. But that took me, folks, maybe 2 minutes to do. It is super quick. It is great. We're going to get this ground bagged up, and we're going to start on one of the hind quarters and get into that and show you guys some of these cool steaks we're going to pull off of it. So it is now hind quarter time. So me personally, this is my favorite part of the deer, just the hind quarters in general. There is so much meat in these. It is awesome. And the hind quarters are the one thing that I actually know a little bit about of anatomy, but again, if you're an expert, just cover your ears because I'm sure I'll get something wrong. So a couple of things. We will be pulling some steaks out of these, but most of it's still going to be ground because again, we use it in this family and we got a lot of mouths to feed. There's also a sirloin. I think this is the sirloin right here that you can pull off to use as a roast. And then you've got the top round, and then you've got the bottom round underneath the top round, which, I mean, duh, makes sense. There's also the rump and eye round and all that. What we use, we're going to use the bottom rounds to actually cut some really nice steaks, and we'll show you guys that in a second. That's actually really cool. Those look really nice. The sirloin makes a really good roast. We've done that before. You cut the whole thing off, bag it up, throw it in the freezer. It's good to go. You can throw it in the crock pot and all that. We're going to be cutting that up. But before I cut it up, I want to show you guys kind of like what that looks like. But other than that, it's just kind of the same thing. We're just going to start getting in here and start getting some of this junk off that we don't want. And so what we'll have is we're going to have a plate to put our ground on. We'll have a plate to put our steaks on. And then, of course, we have something just to put the junk in that we're going to cut off. We're just going to get busy and start on it. And this is going to be pretty good. And then after this, we're going to work on a backstrap, which backstrap is good, but I don't know. These bottom rounds, I like them. If you know how to cook them, and we figured it out, man, they're freaking good. I will give you that much. And we also make some out of the top round up here as well, just because we have a lot of folks here in the household, and we want to make sure we have enough per serving. And while I'm doing that, that's another thing to think about too with servings. So when you're doing this, let's say you're cutting up ground. Well, you want to have enough ground either in the package you make or whatever for a full meal. So let's say you need a pound. So let's say you need a pound of ground to feed your family, and you got a lot of folks in the family. Well, make sure when you're grinding that if you have a bunch of little extras left over from the deer that you cut off, make sure you grind those up together with a very big amount so you can bag them evenly. You don't want to end up with, like, for example, a quarter a pound of ground and that's it. Of course, you could use that to make a little burger or something if you're by yourself, so I suppose it depends on your purpose, but just something to think about. Be a little, dare I say, strategic when you're doing this so you have everything set up in the freezer so when you go to grab meat, you're not completely confused. Because when I first did this, I was just bagging stuff like crazy, and then my poor wife was having to go in and figure out how to reorganize things. So think about that whenever you're doing it. But we're going to get to this, and we're going to show you guys once we get near these sirloins and some of these steaks how we cut all that up. Okay, guys, I lied. I stopped a little bit sooner. So I wanted to show, so we've only been working on this hind quarter for maybe 2 minutes, and all I did was cut some of this tissue that was over here on the top. This is the top round. I think it's the top round. And then over here is the sirloin. But you can see here, you can actually almost pull this apart, the muscle groups, okay? So you can get your hand in there. Now, I know some of you may be squeamish, so you can wear gloves. But you can get your hand in there, and you can actually feel where this sirloin attaches to the bone. And then once you get up under there, you can just use your knife to cut it away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all this off. I'm just going to get underneath here and cut all this off, lift this up out of the way. I want to get my top round and bottom round off, and then pull this sirloin off. And the rest, we're just going to cut it up and get as much junk off of it as we can, just like the shoulder, grind it up, and then we'll cut those steaks. But again, you can see this stuff is it's once you get in there, you can literally break it apart. It's pretty neat. It's just the way the anatomy is laid out in the muscles. If you want to know which one specifically is which, there are charts all over Google Images that you can look up for deer and so forth. But we're going to get right back to it. And again, we're going to get this stuff pulled apart, and we'll catch back up with you guys in just a second. Okay, so here we are. We got a few things removed, and I just want to show you guys. And this didn't take that long. One thing I've learned with the hindquarters, there's a lot of meat, but they actually come off pretty good, and that's because the muscle groups are in such huge chunks. And you can almost get your hands on it. There may be some folks out there that can almost strip them apart almost with their hands. I don't know. I'm sure there's some cool videos on it. So here's what we got. This is the sirloin, and we pulled this off of the hind quarter. Now this is something that would be really good. Maybe trim it up just a little bit. We'll do that here. But we're just going to cut this up and grind it. We're going to have a lot of ground out of this, and this will make some excellent burgers and stuff like that. Taco salad, blah, 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 whatever you want to do, spaghetti. So we're going to keep that, and we're going to grind that here in a little bit. Here is our bottom round and top round. Now these have, if you know these cuts of meat, these have been trimmed up a lot. So I'm still learning on these, but what I'm trying to do is get them to a point where I can actually make, some really good cuts. So I can at least, because I want to get at least 5 steaks out of these, because that's how many we need per serving. And I also want anything that's left over, I'll just grind it. Now that's a good point that I want to make here about the grinding. If you're doing this and you're like, crap, I messed up, or I cut this and didn't mean it. Worst case, folks, grind it up. You're not losing the meat. It's just like the meat that's still over here left on this hind quarter. If it's kind of, for lack of better terms, butchered up pretty bad, that's fine. Get the meat, grind it up. I know some folks that have actually ground the entire deer, where they get multiple deer a year and they'll make one that's fully ground, which I don't know if I would want to do that because I want to keep the back straps at least, but it is an option. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to cut. And I use the official method of this part of my finger for thickness. So, scientific, right? But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and just try to see if I can just smooth this out just a hair without cutting too much off. This is where a good sharp knife comes in handy, even though my boning knife over there, the smaller one, is getting really bad. I don't think I can actually sharpen it that much anymore. And we'll grind that up. Is that good? I don't know. Probably use this a little bit. Cut a few pieces off. All right. So we're going to get 1, 2, probably get about 3 out of this, and we'll cut 2 out of this one, and that'll be perfectly fine. So again, my perfectly to scale method of measuring here. It's like so stressful. By the way, when you do this, especially with the grinding, you are going to hear some sounds. It can be kind of gross. So if that bothers you, just, maybe put some earbuds in. The first time I used the grinder, I was like, gross. It's like something out of a nasty horror movie. See, I don't even know if I did this right. Let's see what we got here. Look at that. There's your steak right there. Not too bad. Put that over there. Might clean it up just a little bit, but it'll be okay. And you can see we're cutting these. We don't have any fat left on them, nothing. Again, to scale. Yeah, I'm going to be lucky to get... Yeah, we're going to get 3 out of this one. That's for sure. I'm just going to cut this one right. I'll make this one a little bit thicker. And depending on the size portions you want, we don't eat large portions in this household. We try to keep things on a more normal human being level, but I know if you want to have a big steak, cut it to whatever you want. That one might have gotten a little too thick. Again, I am not a butcher, and I don't pretend to be. But what I am proving is that anybody can do this. I think that's good. That's actually a pretty thick piece. I might have to thin that out a little bit. My wife's probably going to think I'm crazy when she sees these. And then this one, I need to work with that one. I'm going to clean that one up. Let's see what I can get off of this guy, because I need at least 2 off of this, which should not be a problem at all. Go ahead and cut this end off here just a little bit. Yeah, this poor knife. Gosh. Cutting on this glass cutting board doesn't help either. Grind. See? Case in point. Grind it. If you cut it and you're like, oh crap, grind it. Alrighty, let's see what we can do here. again, my to scale method of measuring. Please keep all laughter to a minimum. That's pretty good right there. And if you cook this stuff right, man, it's great. Steak. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, one more. Trim this up just a little bit. Just get some of this stuff off of here. And when you're pulling this stuff off, it's just common sense. That's all it is. And while I'm doing this, on the previous video, I talked about, well, if you watched it, one about aging the meat, how we do it. Yeah, that should be good. And one method that people age is I've read where or watch videos where people don't age the meat and then they age it in like salt water when it's time to cook. Now, I suppose that could work, especially with steaks. So it just proves there's more than one way to do it. My way is not the right way. It just works great for us. I think this will be it right here. Well, I bet this knife could cut me open pretty good. I did see a video yesterday of a guy, young guy, that skinned an entire whitetail in 2 freaking minutes. My hat's off to you, sir. But I would cut myself so freaking much doing that. It'd be ridiculous. Those steaks are actually pretty big. I might cut a little bit of those off and grind them. But there you go. So, just like that, you can see here, these are big steaks too. We might trim these up a little bit, remove some of these pieces of this tissue that's on there. I think some of this is silver skin. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. I know that Backstraps have those, and we'll explain that in a moment. But look at this. Wonderful. This is the bottom round, top round out of the hindquarters, and we haven't even gotten into the Backstraps yet. And that is all. Those are big steaks, folks. These are great. And then, of course, our sirloin. And like I said, all we're going to do is we're going to cut this up and grind it. So we're going to get back to this, clean this up a little bit, and we'll show you guys what we've got, basically what we've got done here when we complete it, both what we're going to grind and what we got for steaks. Okay, guys, good little stopping point here. We still have more to finish. So here's our 5 steaks that we cut. I actually checked with the boss, and she said these look good. One of them was kind of, for lack of better words, butchered up. So we'll let the processor eat that one. But we still have all this meat to go through to clean off of this bone to grind. That's a lot of ground. So just to kind of put it in perspective, even with removing all these steaks off this hindquarter, the ground is going to be way more than what you get out of the shoulder. That just gives you an idea of how much is on these hindquarters. And again, when you do these steaks, just cut them to taste. These are probably on the thick side for some people. We don't eat a whole lot of steak, so this is kind of more of a treat for us. You could cut these even thinner and get a lot of more servings out of it. You could cut it into, stir fry, all kinds of things. As a matter of fact, you could cut just about any of this venison up into stir fry and be good. But that just kind of shows you. And all I did was just took the knife and cut it the best I could, and it's going to be wonderful. But we're going to get these steaks in a bag and get them in the freezer, and we're going to finish up the rest of this. And now we have come down to the backstrap, which is probably the favorite part of most people. I do still like the hindquarters the most just because there's a lot of meat on them and I like the steaks, but these are very good. Now with the backstraps, there is a lot of different opinions and thoughts on how you can cook these. They're all wonderful. That will kind of dictate, to me at least, how you cut these up. We usually cut them in half, try to get it as best as possible by weight. And then what we'll do is we'll literally like cook the whole, call it a loaf or the half part. And then we'll just cut off the pieces to eat. Kind of like the way you would cook. I think it's a New York strip. I think that's how you cook it, where you're cooking one big large piece. And some of the stuff like this, we'll cut some of this junk off down here. This will all go in the grind pile. And then this silver skin right here, we will be cutting all this off. So the same stuff we try to remove off of the other pieces, we especially want to take it off of this. But all I will do, I've got kind of a marked place here. I'm going to cut this in half. That's it. And then you can see how wonderful that looks. This stuff is fantastic. So we will clean all these up. And then the grinding, so the hindquarter, we have not ground any of that up yet. That's because I wanted to get any little pieces off of this back strap that we can throw in the grind pile. So that way we'll grind it all at once and we'll be able to bag all that once. And also on the subject of bagging, get yourself a scale. It really helps, especially when you're doing the ground, so you'll know how much you're putting. We just use freezer bags, but we go through this stuff pretty quickly. Pretty quickly meaning within like 4 to 5 months. If you're going to be keeping stuff for a long, long time, you might want to look into other options like using freezer paper and there's a lot of options you can do. For us, again, we go through it because we got a lot of folks. But first, we're just going to start cleaning some of this mess off right here. Most all this will be ground up. I'll just try to cut off as much as I can, any of the junk. And we just want to make these look as good as possible. And then again, we'll take our knife here and just really, kind of like the way you would fillet a fish almost, and just try to take this silver skin off. And then folks, we'll just bag them up like that, and these things will be ready to start marinating and cooking. So we're going to jump into this real quick. We'll show you the final outcome as we're cleaning it up, and then also show you the final ground that we got out of that hind quarter. All right, so we got one done. You can see all we did was just use the knife here to cut this silver skin off, and look at that. That is ready. Maybe a few little pieces here and there that we can cut off, but that's good enough for our purpose. That'll be fine. I'll get that here in just a second. But all we're doing, so this one right here hasn't been touched yet, is we're getting up underneath this as best you can. I know there's better techniques, so you experts, just cover your eyes. But all we're doing, we're trying not to take much meat off. All we're going to do is just keep trying to get this off as best as possible. My knife is not the greatest, so it takes me a few passes, folks. But just all you're doing is you're just eyeballing it. Now this end of the back strap does have a little bit more of a mess in it, just for perspective. This part right up here is the thicker part up near the neck. And then as this gets, I'm sorry, wait a minute. Did I get that wrong? Yes, I got that wrong. My bad. This is up near the hind quarter. This is down near the neck. My apologies. So this is the thicker part up near the, like I said, near the hind quarter. I got them reversed because when the deer is hanging, it's hanging upside down when I pull them off. But all you're going to do is take your knife. And I don't need to film all this because it's pretty boring, but you're just going to get in there and keep it sharp and just try to take this stuff off without removing that much meat. It may not look perfect, but you know what? Once you marinate it up and once you get it cooking, none of that's going to freaking matter. None of it will. So we're going to finish cleaning this piece up, and then we're going to show you guys the grind that we got from the deer, and that, or excuse me, from the hind quarter. And that'll basically be half the deer. So you still have the whole other half on top of this. Doesn't include neck meat, rib meat, or the tenderloins either. So quite a bit of meat you can get off of these. Now this was a pretty good sized deer. It was younger, but it was a pretty good sized one. So thankfully we were able to get some pretty decent sized back straps and hindquarters. All right, folks, we were about wrapped up. So just wanted to show you guys this. So here are the back straps all done, ready to go in their bags in the freezer. But just wanted to show this. So this plate, might be hard to see on camera, here at the grinder is full. And I still have that much to go. So that just kind of shows you how much we got out of just that hind quarter. That includes removing those steaks. So folks, this is a lot of meat. If you do it yourself, it's so rewarding, it's so great. And remember, like I said a minute ago, this is only half the deer and doesn't include some of those other parts I was talking about. But I hope this was really helpful for someone. And the purpose of this video is not to say this is the step-by-step method, because quite frankly, I don't do things the right way. I don't do things the way you would do them by the book. I jump in and try to figure them out and try to do things as easy as possible with buying the least amount of stuff. And just trying to pass it on to you folks. If you're thinking about it, give it a shot. This is one of these things that's not hard to do, but you're definitely getting out of your comfort zone. And it's very rewarding, and it's really nice whenever you start cooking this stuff and you see the smile on people's faces of how good it is. So give it a shot, get out there and do it, and I think you're going to love it and enjoy it. Well, folks, that's going to do it for this video. As always, I'll say I hope that helped someone. Please put comments in the bottom, good or bad, what you think about it. I can say, since we did do the processing, we have had some of that venison. It turned out wonderful, as always. So again, the goal is just to have good, healthy meat in the freezer. That's the main thing that we're trying to go for. I am going to put a link in the description below to kind of show the knife set we use as well as the grinder. That grinder is probably the most expensive thing we bought, and that was a little over $100. And that's just because, we learn things as we went. So, there's a lot of options out there for you. They even make some that are electric if you're not able to use the turn the crank and all that. But As always, I thank you folks so much. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and we will chat with you folks next time.